Hey, Labeeb. First of all, I hope I pronounced your name correctly. Labeeb, that's a really cool name. Um, I took a look at your code. I just cloned the repo right now, and it's like literally sort of the first time I'm looking at this. I just checked it out, and I've got the test file and your grid.py file open. First of all, I want to say it's really awesome that you're writing tests and that you're splitting this up into separate modules, and it actually seems kind of clean. I was really impressed by that. So good job with that. You can see here that I've got it open in my Sublime Text editor. And I hope you can see that in the video, but it's highlighting some stuff here. So these are warnings from a linter, a code linter tool that I use. It's called Flake 8. And I just wanted to show you what that does, because I think could be a really helpful tool for you to avoid some of the common mistakes and just to get your formatting consistent. I mean, honestly, with the formatting, if you're just working on a pet project for yourself, then it doesn't matter as much. But I think it's good to build a habit and just kind of, stick to some style guide. And there's some really good tools for that available. So I wanted to show you this one. It's called Flake 8. And you can just install it through pip. So I've actually already got it set up. And it's really easy to run. So even if you don't integrate this with your editor, you can just go Flake 8 and then just give it all your Python files. And you can see here that it actually finds a couple of things, right? In your grid.py and in your testlive.py. Most of them are formatting related. For example, here in this case, there would be a missing new line between these two functions or methods here. That stuff isn't too terrible. I personally, I still believe it makes sense to clean it up. But it's not going to affect sort of whether the code works or not. Like it's the same with this stuff here. Missing a space. If you want to go with that, go all the way with the formatting stuff. That's all okay. The cool thing, however, with Flake 8 is that it also does some static analysis on your code. So it can detect syntax errors, and it can also find things where you're not following the Python best practices. So for example, in this case, we're comparing, we're checking for truthiness with this equals true. And typically what you do in Python is you would either use the is operator, because that's going to make sure that you're checking for an instance of true, not just a specific instance of true, but you're looking for something that is true itself, or some subclass, or some other instance of true. So usually you want to check for truthiness like that. And actually you could even simplify this and just say if self is alive, and then the if statement here will kind of check that for truthiness, right? So I mean, it's just a little things. It's not going to affect the way your code works, but stuff like that I find really helpful in finding places where you can simplify the code. So I just want to go through this, skim through this and then see what we can do here. So, okay, so I think this is interesting where we're having the global here. Probably the first thing that stands out for me here is this comparison. So we're saying, okay, if self, live grid, and then we're checking that. So that makes sense here. Then you want to return true or false. So you can actually shorten this, and you could just say return. And then what that does, it's basically going to evaluate this statement here, or this expression. And then if it's equal to 1, then it's going to return true. And if it's not equal to 1, then it's going to return false. So you can just get rid of some of these lines. And then what I found interesting here about the live grid stuff, I don't really understand why we would do it like that. So I'm seeing you've got this create grid here, and I saw this over there where you're creating an instance of your grid class. So that makes sense. And then you're calling create grid on it, which assigns the grid to live grid. So my thinking here would be whether whether that's the best way to do it. Because really you're, here with create grid, you're just basically giving this guy a new name here, right? Just giving it another reference. So when we look at this test here, for example, when you modify IP, that would also affect the live grid here in this class. And so that could be, that could be what we want, but it could also be a little bit dangerous if we actually just assign it and don't copy it over. So I would maybe think about that design choice. Okay, so you know what? Let's just go do a pass on like the formatting stuff here, so we can get that out of the way, right? So it's saying, okay, I want space in here, and that stuff doesn't really matter all that much. It's also going to complain about the line length being too long, stuff like that. We don't really have to worry about that too much. I just want to make sure we're actually pip 8 clean. And I really like what you're doing here with the your print statements. I think this is a pretty good way to debug. A lot of people say, oh, you shouldn't use what's going on here? You shouldn't use print statements to do your debugging. You always want to use a debugger. But honestly, I don't believe in that. You should use whatever gives you the best result. So, okay, so I don't know why it's complaining about these. But what we're going to do is just clean up these. Oh, yeah, okay, probably about missing space or something. Too many blank lines, yeah. So, this seems a little bit like anal retentive if I'm doing this, but I really like following PEP 8 because it makes it a lot easier. I find just to, mentally parse the code and understand what it's doing. So with this guy here, you could think about formatting it slightly differently because then it becomes clear that this is some kind of two-dimensional structure. Which I think is nice because it makes a little bit more obvious what's going on. So I think these two are the same. So I'm just going to select all of them and do a, whoops. Oh, that's weird. Okay, I thought that worked. Okay, so let's just do that. Then it'll be easier for me to understand kind of what's going on here. Okay, I think that one's the same too. And here, let's also reformat that guy. Yeah, so now we're getting rid of all the linter errors here and just kind of normalizing the way our code looks. Okay, so now it's complaining about a couple more things. So here, for example, again, we're comparing to true or false with equals equals. We want the is here. It's fine for the numbers. So with these messages, what you could actually do is you could move them into the assert, right? So if you do a comma and then you could say left edge neighbor missing or something like that. And then if that assert fails, you'd actually get that as a printout on your console. So, you don't have to do it, but it could be a neat trick to just kind of make that a little bit easier for you, because otherwise you have to go back manually and kind of check these. So this is a bit weird that they're just strings, right? Like if it might be easier if you're just, or what I would do would be something like this, where I put just a regular comment instead of a string. Because also the comments are going to get stripped, and then the string is going to be processed by the Python interpreter. So it's not going to make a performance difference really, but and in my mind, this should be just a regular comment. Okay, so this is definitely something you could look into with the Boolean comparison here. But other than that, I mean, here you could also just do, assert is alive, and you could actually drop that, right? So instead of doing this, you could say, okay, assert not is alive. That's probably actually what I would do, unless you want to absolutely make sure that it's returning a Boolean. But honestly, like with these, I would probably just say, check that they're truthy or not truthy, and then it just makes that a little bit easier. And I feel like it makes the tests a little bit easier to read, because you're stripping down some of that extra verbiage here. Okay, so this one we want to be true. Okay, I hope this is still going to work at the end when we're done. Okay, so now now all the linter stuff should be clean. So let's run flake 8 again. Okay, line too long. What's it complaining about? Oh, weird. I don't get that in my editor. Yeah, so I mean, technically that line would be a little bit too long. We could simplify that a bit. Let's actually leave it like that. That's okay. And then what's happening here? Oh yeah, okay, so it doesn't like this print space stuff. So really, this is just a regular function call. And you don't necessarily need that space. I mean, you can put it if you want, but it wouldn't really be the recommendation. Okay, let's actually try and like cut this line down a bit. So we're just ORing all of that together. So what we could do here is this, and probably split it up here like this, because I feel like that splits it up pretty logically. If I'm not mistaken. Oh, okay. Yeah, so we need to indent it like that. Right, and now, okay, so this is actually flake 8 clean. Nope, that was too much. So PyTest and then test live. Okay, let's see what happens. Just gonna bump that up a bit. Okay, so okay, so we've got test create grid, and all of these worked. Test num neighbors. So is this actually a bug that I introduced? I'm not sure. So where is this happening? For the cell in the middle. Okay, so let's just make sure I didn't screw this up. Trying to test again. Yeah. Okay, so I definitely broke this here for you. So let's undo that. Just jumping back and forth between versions in so what I edited and what was in my Git. Yeah, okay, so it's probably copy and paste, right? So accidentally, when I copy and pasted that formatting change, when I broke it. Okay, so now we've got this cleaned up. Got this cleaned up. I'm just gonna make a commit here just to take a snapshot of this cleaned up version, right? And then we can dive into making some changes. Okay, so commit that. Okay, all right, we're gonna commit that. And okay, so now we run this. We're at this point where test apply rules blows up. And we're getting that error here. So now actually before we go into that, I have a suspicion when we look at this apply rules function. So what we're doing here is we're creating a new grid B, and then we're calling create grid, right? And when you look at create grid, what this does is it really just assigns the live grid variable. So at this point, A live grid and B live grid are pointing to the same list, right? So we're not creating a copy, which means if I change A.liveGrid, we're also going to change B.liveGrid. And so my suspicion would be that, as we're iterating over this thing, that we're creating new cells and killing cells in B. However, what that actually does is, because they're the same thing, it's also modifying A, which means that your neighbor counts are not going to work, right? So what I would probably do is I would try, in terms of debugging this, let's not do this. In terms of debugging this, I would try to actually make a proper copy of your live grid with the copy module. So let's give this a shot and just see where we're getting with that. So I'm going to import the, what's happening here? Import the copy module. And then here, instead of just assigning that, we're going to say copy, deep copy, IP. And that's going to create a new copy of that list. And now if we run this, it actually passes. So the problem here was, like I said, they were both pointing to the same list. And as you were iterating and making changes to B, you were actually affecting the live grid in A, because they were one and the same thing. There were not two different copies, they were one and the same thing. So this was really screwing up your algorithm, which was otherwise correct. It was just this piece here that was missing, that you needed to make a copy of the live grid. So this fixes that one problem, right, in the apply rules. So now all of your tests are passing. So now I would probably make another commit. And then there's one more thing we can take a look at, and that is, so it's I'm not exactly sure what you're doing with this here, global live grid. So probably what my gut feeling would be on this stuff, probably get rid of that, and I would introduce a proper constructor here, right? I'd probably do this, right? So where instead of calling create grid explicitly, I would just say, okay, we're introducing this dunder init method. And then I would just say self live grid, basically this. Do this, and then actually get rid of create grid. Here we don't need that. We basically don't need these globals, because this is just a class level attribute now, or like this is just an attribute on that grid class here, so we don't need the global here. So I'm not sure why that was in there, but we were not going to need that for now. I think this is pretty neat actually, what we're doing here, where you're just giving the offsets and then adding up the count. This is pretty cool, man. This is nice. Yeah, well done. There's probably a way to simplify that with the sum function and some crazy like generator or whatever, but this is pretty cool. Yeah, I think this is a good function. Okay, yeah, so here you're just setting that to 0 and 1. Potentially you could think about making these constants, right? Having like a special value for dead cell and a live cell or something like that, so that they're not like these magic values. But I think it's fine for a small small piece of code. Yeah, and then okay, so what I introduced here was the constructor, right? So I got rid of the create grid. So what that means now, we can just, instead of calling create grid, we just be calling grid. And I want to update the tests here as well. Because really what that does is it makes it a lot easier to work with this class, I think. Or I think, I think the other way to do it would work too, but it's really powerful if you can just, oh yeah, that's my timer. It's really powerful if you can just work with the grid directly, right? Like the whole point of this, of creating a class, in my mind, is that you can just create a new instance of that, and you pass everything it needs to this constructor. So really what this allows us to do is we can say my grid equals a new grid, and then pass it something, and it's going to create a copy of that. And that's going to create a new grid class for us, and then everything you need you actually pass to the constructor, right? And this is really similar to the way you would. What's a good example? This is, if you're thinking about something that's built into Python, if you're just doing list, for example. Well, maybe list is not a good example, but if you're creating a new object, you really want to give it everything it needs for it to create itself, and so you don't have to remember calling like a special create grid method and stuff like that. So I think this would be the the more Pythonic way to do it. Okay, so where was I getting distracted here? Okay, so basically what I'm doing now is refactoring all of that stuff to not use the create grid method anymore, because we won't need it. And that, that makes the code a bit shorter as well. Okay. And now, because we have your awesome tests here, let's make sure it still works. Okay, so we're still, tests are still running clean, which is great. And probably what I do here, yeah, okay, so I think this is a bit, I don't like this line because it can really lead, to all of these weird issues where we're assigning, we're updating the live grid, but kind of by swapping it out, which, that's okay. But then it can get a little bit dangerous here. So, I'm wondering, okay, so at the moment, this apply rules function, it returns the grid itself, right? It returns a.livegrid. So what you could think about doing, first of all, is making this guy here a method on the class. So this is probably what I would do. So you just say self. And then what this would do is it would create a copy of itself. Create a copy of itself. And then instead of, okay, so let's call this state. Okay, let's call this current grid, right? Let's call this guy current grid. And then we could say, okay, current grid. And then we're checking everything on the current grid. And we're updating ourselves. right? And then I think it becomes more clear what our intention is. It's going to get rid of that. So we're updating ourselves, and we don't return anything because we're modifying our own life grid here. And so I would say, okay, if you're running this, I would just say, okay, so if we want to use that code now, so I would just say apply rules. And then I check what this does. Yeah. So in that way, we no longer need to do this reassignment because we're creating a copy of the current state. And then based on the current state, we're updating ourselves in this apply rules method here. And I think that makes the code a little bit easier, right? Because you can just go a.apply rules, and it's going to compute the next state and kind of update itself. And that's probably how I'd do it. All right, so this is a bit of a long and rambly video, but I hope it helps you out, man. I think you did really well with this stuff. I was really impressed by how you actually split it up into separate test code. And it was, you were so close. It was almost working. It was just this one thing with the copy. And you know what? This was tripping me up as well. A couple of years ago, I was banging my head against the wall trying to figure this out because it's such an easy mistake to make in Python. So yeah, you were really, really close, and I think this looks good. So what I'm gonna do now is probably gonna create a pull request and send you this video, and then yeah, maybe you can learn something from it. If not, that's also cool, and I hope that helped you out. All right, I gotta go back to work.